Boris Johnson is allegedly obsessed with him, according to his aides, and he was returned as Tees Valley Mayor in May this year with a whopping majority of 73% of the vote. That in a traditionally Labour area. Ben Houchen, of course, for That's Who It Is a leading light of the Conservative Party's reinvention as the Prime Minister attempts to deliver on his election promise to level up the country. And Ben joins us here live on the Times Radio stand. Hi, Ben.
Hi, Tom.
Thanks for coming in and getting up early on a Sunday morning, as you've just told us. So let me just ask you first about the petrol crisis. That's still occupying a lot of people's minds. In your view, does the government share any blame, any responsibility at all for the current state of affairs? Petrol stations empty across certainly large swathes of the south and southeast still today.
Yeah, and I think we've got to reinforce that point, haven't we? I've just come from Teesside in the northeast, driven past innumerable number of petrol stations right across to Manchester, and there is free-flowing traffic. There are no huge queues at petrol stations. I was able and very fortunate this morning to be able to fill up my tank with petrol, and I drove across. So the issue is subsiding, but ultimately it's an issue of logistics. It's a problem that we've seen not just across the UK but across Europe as well. We're seeing a huge shortage of HGV drivers going back to 2015, 2016, and you know, it's a symbiotic relationship, right? I mean, there is some stuff that the DVLA could be doing. There's some stuff we could be doing around the testing to be able to approve people for HGV, but at the same time businesses also need to step up to the mark. This is something that businesses have been talking about for some time, like I say, going back to 2015-16, and I think there needs to be more done by the industries to say, well, what could we be doing to make sure that people are trained, and also making this a more appealable sector to go into, because that's one of the big barriers as well.
My question was on what the government could have done more. I mean, understandable, this is a problem for everybody to lean into. But Oliver Dunn, we were just speaking to, he wouldn't deny that the Cabinet first discussed HGV driver shortages in July. We're now October. There are labour shortages up and down the economy, abattoirs, brickies, whatever you choose. Would you like to have seen the government do more on planning to mitigate all those supply problems?
Well, we would always expect the government to do more to plan. And like I say, this isn't just limited to the UK. Just the other day we had Belgium and Germany and France all talking about the same major problems that I'm sure have been discussed for months. So it's not as easy as the government just pulling a lever and saying, there we go, we prepared in advance and therefore we've solved it. It's a multifaceted issue that covers immigration, it covers logistics, supply chains, COVID, the moving of containers from the Far East in ports in China that are closed down, right the way through to, dare I say it, Brexit as well. So there's a lot going on, and it's not just as straightforward as if we press this button, the whole situation will be solved.
OK, let's get on to you. Let's get on to the Tees Valley. Now, it's reported, and you know this, that Boris Johnson is obsessed with you. Now, we believe that's in a good way rather than
I think that's come from one rogue journalist, by the way.
One rogue journalist, Sebastian Payne of the Financial Times.
He's a great guy, Seb, but maybe overly optimistic.
I'm not sure he likes to be called a rogue journalist. Anyway, it is true. The Prime Minister does talk about you all the time. And Number 10 aide said he's always talking about Ben and how the party needs more leaders like him. Do you understand why the Prime Minister has that obsession?
Well, what I would say is we've been extremely successful across Teesside, Darlington and Hartlepool in being able to deliver new investment, new jobs, new transport infrastructure. And I think the actual principle of what the Prime Minister is trying to get across to the team at Number 10 is we need more areas like Teesside to help him deliver levelling up, whether that's in Manchester, whether it's in Northumberland, Leeds, right across actually large parts of the UK, dare I say, outside of major cities that deserve levelling up as well. How do we get more combined authorities and mayors to be able to help the Prime Minister deliver on his pledge to level up the country?
Now, the way you've done it in Tees Valley, if I can summarise in one slightly sort of crass sentence, I suppose, is big state politics, using quite a bit of public money to create jobs. For example, keeping loss-making Teesside Airport open. Very popular, but it costs taxpayers money. That's great, because it seems to have got you re-elected, but it's not exactly Tory, is it?
Well, I disagree with that, actually. There was a very strong business plan that we put to the electorate before we bought it, both at the election and then after I was elected. The deal that I struck with the owners of the airport, I put to the public before we ended up buying it. And the whole purpose of saving the airport is it's a key piece of infrastructure to be able to connect the north of England and Teesside to the rest of the world. That means that we are better connected to be able to attract more investment. We're able to connect our businesses to the rest of the world to make sure that they can get more clients and expand their supply chains. And we also made it very clear that this isn't about state subsidy infinitum. Actually, we've got a plan that within the next 3 years, and we've very clearly published this business plan publicly, the airport will move back into profit, because we've been very clear that it has to become sustainable and stand on its own 2 feet, because that's the only way that you can have a successful airport. You can't subsidise an airport forever.
The problem, I suppose, that some Tory MPs might say is this is all well and good for Tees Valley, a lot of taxpayers' money going into to subsidise failing areas, but the government simply cannot afford to do that in every single red wall patch up and down the country, or it will go bust.
Well, with devolution, you get a significant pot of money, as all devolved areas have, to be able to take the decisions locally that you think are right for your local area. But it's also not all about money either. With the transport authorities, so we can make key decisions that attract private investment. If you look at the former Redcar Steelworks site that we're redeveloping, that's now the UK's largest free port. That hasn't cost the government or the Treasury or the taxpayer a penny. But what it's done is it's incentivised business. It's made it more appealing. It's lowered taxes in that zone. And we've already seen investors come. We're seeing potential battery manufacturers wanting to come to the site. We've already got GE signed up to build a new offshore wind blade factory on the site. That's investment that wouldn't have come had the government not put the free port in place. That doesn't cost anything. That's about deregulation, and it's about making it simpler for businesses to come and invest and create jobs in places like Teesside.
What do you say, though, to Tory voters in the south, the blue wall, as it's called, places like Chesham and Amersham? A by-election was lost to the Lib Dems, allegedly because quite a lot of concern about taxpayers' money trundling up north, up the M1, as Boris Johnson used to say, about taxpayers' money going to Scotland way back when. No longer a bad thing, though, would appear. That makes them angry. There are Tory party members here across the south, in places like Surrey and Sussex, who are very annoyed that people like you and areas like yours are getting their money.
Well, I don't necessarily think it's as straightforward as that. They're very supportive of seeing Teesside succeed, all of the Conservative MPs that I've been speaking to across the country. But what they also want is a piece of the pie, and rightly so, because I think what we're moving towards, and it's why the Prime Minister has got the slogan levelling up rather than what we used to call the Northern Powerhouse, because levelling up is applicable to the whole of the country. And I would dare to say that actually places in Cornwall and the southwest are equally as deprived and have equal troubles to places like Teesside. And so levelling up is actually about giving a leg up to left behind areas that largely are non-urban, non-city centre areas, which is why I think hopefully later this year we'll see in the government white paper for levelling up a real push towards English devolution for the whole of the country. So we can have more Teessides, we can have more mayors that deliver for their local area and they get the support directly from government.
Well, we'll get on to levelling up because we certainly hope we're going to hear a lot more about it at this conference, what exactly it might mean. But just on the shape of the Tory party today, it does seem to be certainly reforming around its brand new red wall electorate. Voters in the Tees Valley area, for example, that you represent, former Labour voters who are culturally more conservative but economically happier to tax and spend. Now, presumably you don't think that's a bad thing?
Well, I'd also disagree. I'm not a large state, high tax conservative.
You like a bit of interventionism.
Well, there's nothing wrong with using the states of the levers of state and government to be able to make the local environment more appealing. And again, it's not necessarily about the public and private sector. I've always been, not to get too kind of philosophical about this, but Milton Friedman once said that there was no difference between the public and private sector. It was the mechanisms for failed programmes and failed departments to be able to die. And as long as local leaders understand that if they try and make an intervention, it doesn't fail, not to continue to subsidise. And the airport's a great example. I've been very clear to the public, if the plan doesn't work, the airport will have to close and we cannot allow for it to continue to be subsidised. That doesn't necessarily mean higher taxes. Like I say, we've talked about free ports, which is lower regulation, and I think there's a lot more that the government could be doing a bit more creatively with regulation or deregulation to help, for example, lower the cost of things like net zero. So again, I think it's an overly simplistic argument that Northern Tories are all of a sudden high tax, big state Conservatives. That's not really what it's about. It's a lot more subtle and nuanced than people would like to think.
Okay. You have, now we're going to talk about levelling up, by the way, you have been slightly critical of just how much detail we've had from the Prime Minister so far. He got elected off the back of this phrase, levelling up, in 2019. It's almost 2 years on from that general election victory. Superchargers under levelling up pretty quickly, is your words, because we can't just rely on the mess the Labour Party is in to be re-elected. What do you mean by that?
Well, obviously we've had the pandemic, haven't we, with COVID, and rightly the country's been concentrating on that since March of 2020. And so obviously other big key priorities of the Prime Minister and this government, like levelling up, have taken a back seat. But now, hopefully, touch wood, COVID is starting to recede and is behind us. The government absolutely needs to supercharge the plan for levelling up, because at the next election, that is what we're going to be judged on. We're going to be judged on, have we been able to show very key indicators, but ideally physically, that people can see that levelling up is actually happening. Now, there again, just to go a little bit further, levelling up won't all happen by the next election. There's a huge divide, like I say, between the haves and have-nots in this country. It's going to take potentially 15, 20 years to try and bridge that GDP gap between the north of England and the south of England. But at the next election, those people that voted Conservative for the first time in places like Teesside need to be able to see progress towards it. And time is running out before the next election, which is why I've always said, and which is, I agree with you, Tom, hopefully we'll hear a lot more about it during this conference. The government need to set out a clear path of how they're going to start a long levelling up for other parts of the country outside of places like Teesside, so we can win the next election and continue with that plan to level up the whole country.
In your words, we need to see levelling up actually happening. What does actually happening mean, though? What does it look like on the ground?
So I think in phase one of levelling up, especially in places like the north of England, we've had a lack of investment, infrastructure-wise, investment-wise, for decades, and that's an attack really on governments of both colours going back 40 or 50 years. So in large places, again, I'll take my area for example to use. We aren't even at the starting line with the likes of Manchester or Birmingham or London. We don't have the road system. We don't have, in parts of my area, a bus service full stop, never mind a London-style transport system. We don't have a tube or a metro system. So the government needs to invest in large infrastructure that gives us the same opportunities as other parts of the country, and that is big physical infrastructure around trains, buses, investment, private investment like the GE factory that we're seeing in Teesside that people can point to. And again, it might not be finished by the next election. You might see half-built factories, you might be train stations going through upgrades, but people in phase one, I think, need to see a big infrastructure and physical improvement, which will lead to the key indicator that Boris Johnson set out early this morning and yesterday, which is wage growth in low economic areas like Teesside, those in the bottom quarter percentile of local authority areas.
Physical infrastructure, for example, the Northern Powerhouse Rail Project. Prime Minister dropped a hint yesterday. Now that's, of course, connecting.
I missed that one.
Yeah, no, he did. He did.
Oh,
it was on. I think it was on BBC Northwest. Jack was watching it intently. But the Northern Powerhouse Rail, that's HS3, as it's commonly known as. And for people who might not be familiar, it's connecting the west of the Pennines with the east of the Pennines, Leeds to Manchester high-speed rail link, with a few other bits and bobs thrown in, obviously. Yeah. Presumably, you'd love to see that, and you've been pushing for that for ages.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be fair, the government have committed to this over the last 3 or 4 years, certainly since the Prime Minister has been in post. But these types of projects, as you see with some of the upgrades in the tube system in London or HS2, they take years and years to get off the ground, not just the CPO process, the planning process, the contracting process. So the question will be for the government is how quickly can we get a spade in the ground and how quickly can we start some of those physical upgrades? Because when you actually look at when the Northern Powerhouse Rail is due to be complete and actually operational, everybody accepts that plan is about 2038 to 2042, depending on which part of the line you're on. So again, it's about actually we need to have these long-term aspirations to level up, which are going to take 10, 15, 20 years. But in the meantime, by the next election, the government needs some quick wins.
Like what? How do you get a quick win in 2 years?
Well, so for example, we could start to see the upgrade of train stations that are going to be on the Northern Powerhouse Railway line. You can then start to upgrade train stations actually within a 12, 18-month period. That's not a difficult thing to do. It would signal to the electorate that the government is getting on with levelling up because it would be part of, in effect, the bigger picture. That's just one example specific to Northern Powerhouse Rail. But it's this interesting dovetailing between, if you're going to level up, you need to be able to buy into the vision of the long term, that this is going to take a long time, but we are going in the right direction. But the public and the electorate will only go along with you if you can demonstrate some short-term wins that they can see a physical difference. Now, they don't want it all complete by the time of the next election, but they need to see progress. And hopefully that's what we'll hear set out from the Prime Minister this week.
You also said recently that in places like Teesside, it will go back to the same old belief of you can never trust a Tory and they will go and vote for somebody else if you can't demonstrate that actual levelling up and your promises coming true. I mean, I thought it was a really interesting quote. It does suggest to me that that electorate that you won twice, 2017, 2021, Boris Johnson won in 2019, that's still very much borrowed. It's not actually yours just yet. They're not conservative to Tories. Right?
And I've always said that this kind of concept that came up that the people that voted Conservative for the first time lent their votes to the Conservative Party, I think is absolutely true. And I think that people in life want to be proven right. So those people that did vote for us want to vote for us again, but we need to give them the excuse and we need to be able to show, again, that progress on levelling up. So they can point to something or they can see a physical, positive difference in their life to say, I voted for the Conservatives for the first time. My grandparents or my great-grandparents would be really upset with me, but I knew it was the right thing to do, and therefore I'm going to do it again. Now, if we can't point to those things and local people don't see a physical difference in their life, then I think we could go to the area where it is, well, I really wish I hadn't done that. You know, the Tories, do what Tories do. You should never trust a Tory. That kind of thing we've heard in the North East for a long, long time. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to go back to Labour, interestingly enough. It just means that I think places like Teesside, the Red Wall, are not Conservative. They're no longer Labour. They're just much more competitive, and people are going to be much more savvy, I think, over the next few general elections with where their vote goes.
So as we speak, Red Wall voters in Teesside or wherever they might be, they're prepared to give Tories a chance, but they don't yet trust them.
I think they want to give us a chance, and the jury is out as to whether a lot of people think that was the right thing to do or not. Now, I think in places like Teesside, As we saw in May, I was fortunate enough to get re-elected. We won the Hartlepool by-election. In places like Teesside, levelling up is working. Again, Michael Gove, the new Levelling Up Secretary of State, came to Teesside on his first visit and said, if you want to see what levelling up is like, come to Teesside. And I'm very proud of that. But we need to do that for other parts of the country, other red wall areas, to make sure that we return more Conservatives to continue with the plan.
Ben, part of the problem with what you're saying is it's obviously very expensive to put large amounts of money into large amounts of the country, and we all know the public finances are not in a great state after a global pandemic that's cost us 300 billion quid to get through. Do you think, when it comes down to it, the Treasury's got some big decisions to make? Would you be happy to see them borrowing more to embark on the sort of investment programme you're talking about, or would you rather see taxes go up to pay for it?
Well, it depends on the return profile to the Treasury for the investment that they can receive to increase the tax base. I'm not a large taxing Conservative, so I would rail against tax increases. But there are
so
other
borrowing to pay for it?
Well, not necessarily. For example, I mean, I've always been against HS2. £100 billion price tag. If you gave me less than 1% of what it's going to cost HS2, I could transform and revolutionise transport in the North East. I heard this morning Andy Burnham saying that he wants £1 billion that would transform even a city like Manchester into a London-style transport system. These actually, in the context of some of the big projects that the government are running, are relatively small amounts of money and doesn't necessarily require more borrowing. What it does is requires smarter spending and a smarter profile from government on what it does see as its priorities. And with levelling up, it needs to make some important decisions.
Many moons ago, before I was doing this job, I worked for the Yorkshire Post newspaper, close to your neck of the woods,
yeah.
and we were talking about levelling up long before it was called that. Part of the problem was always, I felt, and we felt, was that the north of England never really spoke as one voice, and there was a lot of infighting between Liverpool and Manchester and between different parts of Yorkshire and the north east. Is it time for the north to come together and actually lobby the government as one on this?
I don't think so, just because it's kind of the opposite of what devolution is. We talk about local areas understanding their areas better, electing mayors like myself to be able to do what's best and spend what's best and do what's best for our local area. What is right for a place like Teesside, Middlesbrough, what's right for Newcastle or Leeds is going to be very different to what's right, for example, here in Manchester. So having this one-size-fits-all, whether it's across the whole of the UK or just the north of England, isn't really the right fit, I don't think. But there are projects that we can all come together sometimes that transcend our local areas, like Northern Powerhouse Rail. I don't know a leader in the north of England, Conservative, Labour or otherwise, that isn't supportive of Northern Powerhouse Rail, but coming together and trying to kind of make this this large, single, homogenous blob of policy on the north of England, I don't necessarily think is the right way to go about it. But like I say, there are examples where we can do that.
Ben, finally, let's just talk about you. When I Wikipedia'd you to prepare for this interview, I discovered you're 34.
Yes.
And I'm 47, so my God, do I feel old now. You're a young man. You're very busy running Tees Valley now. I think you know what's coming next, don't you? Could you see yourself on as an MP?
I've been asked the
well,
question,
no,
Tom.
but you can now use this opportunity to give a straight answer. You're going to be an MP one day.
The answer is I don't know. I mean, I love the job that I'm doing. I hope to be able to continue it long into the future. But if I am no longer the Tees Valley Mayor, I would obviously love to stay in politics because it's something that's passionate to me. And also, I also think that in this type of role, you can have more of an effect on people's lives, hopefully for the positive. And so if I'm not the Tees Valley Mayor, then you never know, I might be in the House of Commons. But there's a lot of luck and timing involved in politics, so you can't really think that far ahead at all.
And you've got the years ahead of you, as we've just discussed, unlike Jack and I, tragically.
Ouch.
There are some... Sorry, Jack.
47 is no age, Tom.
Jack isn't 47 either. He has got almost as much grey hair as I've got. Finally, Ben, there are also some in the Conservative Party talking about you as a future Prime Minister.
I think that's... again, overly optimistic. I think that's highly, highly unlikely. And like I say, you can only concentrate on the job that's in front of you and take one day at a time.
As unlikely as being reincarnated as an olive, as someone once said?
I would probably suspect so, yeah. I wouldn't put my chances much higher than that.